So let me just make a couple of remarks about why innovation in health is so important and it's such a timely moment to think about it. I'm going to give you 3 reasons. The first is that I often observe that we have the good fortune to be participants in a biomedical revolution. And that isn't hyperbole, it is actually the case. If you think about the rate of change and discovery relevant to health, it is phenomenal. You've heard about the omics revolution, I'm sure, and the basic facts are that it took 10 years to sequence the whole first human genome at a cost of $3 billion, completed in about year 2000. Today you can sequence a human genome in a day at the cost of $1,000, and that cost is coming down. And that's just genomics. There's transcriptomics, metabolomics, epigenomics, and. So the data that is being accumulated, giving insights into the pathogenesis of human disease, is moving at an extraordinary pace. Cancer therapy is changing dramatically. Cancers that we thought were untreatable when Bruce and I qualified now can be manipulated by manipulating the immune system. The digital revolution has been slow to impact on healthcare, but now is moving at an extraordinary pace. And even psychiatry is beginning to yield up some of its secrets in terms of the basis of some of these very disabling mental health disorders. The second reason that innovation is so important is that the demographics of the populations that we're looking after are becoming ever more demanding. I'm sure you know that. So the fraction of the population aged over 65 is going to double by about year 2030. And of course that comes with all sorts of health needs. And patients living with multiple long-term conditions are ever more part of the healthcare service that the NHS provides. So the needs are becoming ever more intense. And the third thing I absolutely don't need to tell you, and that is that the health service that we currently have and love and enjoy and benefit from is creaking and groaning under the strains of the resources that are available to it under our current arrangements. And so just going on into the future with the explosion of information, the enhanced demographics that impose more pressure, just doing more of the same is simply not going to work. And so we absolutely need innovation.
This country has got a pretty long history of innovation. But in health and medicine, I think we've made a massive contribution to global medicine in its broadest sense. So let me just run through some of the things that we've done to contribute to that. In terms of science, we discovered that the mosquito was a carrier of malaria. We discovered the theory of evolution. People working at King's discovered the double helix. We've developed most of the sequencing technology for that. We've done the first stem cell transplant, the first blood transplant, the first antibiotic, the first Dolly the sheep, the first cloning of an animal. And we've, in my specialty, developed the ability to stop and start the heart electively, which at the time was a very controversial thing to do, and yet has completely transformed the practice of modern heart surgery. And that's just a few of the things. And then when we start to look at what our contribution has been in the kind of medical device industry, it starts with something as simple as a clinical thermometer, the intraocular lens, the ECG, the laryngeal mask, the MRI scanner, the CT scanner. So our heritage, if you like, is pretty significant. And then when you start to add into that the fact that we have 4 of the top 10 universities in the world, that if you look at the number of Nobel Prize winners for medicine or physiology and you divide that per capita population, we have twice as many as the United States. And on top of that, we, in the Global Innovation Index of the world, which takes into account 142 economies, this country generally floats somewhere around about number 2 or number 3 as a global innovator. Now, our biggest innovation, in my view, was the National Health Service. Because in 1948, when the Health Service was formed, all the policy developments had to go on before that. And in 1947, things were probably worse than they'd been before. There were floods, there was an exchange rate problem with the dollar, there was a terrible winter, and a number of things that hadn't been rationed during the war were rationed or had the rations made worse. So the economic climate was terrible. And yet, despite that, we were able to develop, I think, an iconic development of the British social conscience, which was the welfare state of which the NHS is a single part. Now, if we could link everything that we do in terms of the academic and innovative endeavor that I described at the beginning with our National Health Service, we could really have something that's truly great. We could, I believe, become the best healthcare service in the world. One of the issues that we really have to grapple with is, in the face of this increasing demand and not enough money, how do we maintain quality? And it seems to me that the thing that links that is innovation. In other words, doing things differently, doing things better, and doing them at scale. Now, innovation is, in my view, about not accepting the status quo and having a pretty healthy disregard for things that many people consider to be impossible, because it's those sort of ambitions that drive change in industries in general and have the opportunity to drive change within our National Health Service. It's quite easy when you hear people talking about innovation to start thinking it's about robots and nanotechnology, but it isn't. Innovation goes on every day in our National Health Service. So it seems to me that there are three kind of tiers at which innovation can work. The first is through individuals in the way that I've described. The second is that organizations need to help those individuals to innovate. One of the interesting things that I heard was once Steve Jobs, working for Apple, said that any company that has an innovation department is not an innovative company, because innovation should be part of your DNA. It should be the way you do business, looking for improvements in quality or productivity.
If you look at the Apple sales of iPads over Christmas, one of the biggest sale reasons for iPads were actually for carers and children of elderly people, buying them to help with communication. So a lot of the elderly generation actually communicate with their children and their relatives both within the UK and internationally via iPads and tools. And as we see more and more people having care delivered in their own homes or nursing homes or residential homes, we see increasing people being responsible for elderly people, so carers as well as other dependents. And there is more use or scope to use technology when offering care to those people. So they might not be using it directly, but they'll be benefiting from it indirectly, and there's a huge space around that at the moment.
Terrific. Okay, well, thank you very much. Great questions and great answers. So, let's move things on because we're getting near the finish. My next task, I think I'd invite you to stay here. My next task is to tell you the results of the voting that you did on those top challenges that need innovation. Number one was obesity, and particularly childhood obesity. Number two was antimicrobial resistance, and number three was diabetes. Now, I think number three probably and number one, I think in your minds may be the same thing, because of course the epidemic of type 2 diabetes, which is the really big problem, is so closely linked to obesity. So I think they're absolutely appropriate choices, and they are undoubtedly huge challenges. Antimicrobial resistance, of course, has been the major focus of the Chief Medical Officer, Sally Davis, who's actually mobilized an international movement, I think, to try to address this challenge. Some of the statistics are extraordinary. One that sticks in my mind, I don't know how many of you eat farmed salmon. Most of the salmon we eat is farmed, by the way. By the time that a farmed salmon is killed to be eaten, it has consumed its whole body weight in antibiotics because of the way that these salmon are farmed. That's just fish. The same thing applies in agriculture. And of course, it's a huge pressure on GPs to prescribe when young children are brought along who have got, the very distressed parents with upper respiratory tract infections, and. And so the problem is huge. One could say it's a market failure because pharmaceutical industries are not so motivated to generate new antibiotics because they reckon the market is small. and the challenges scientifically are quite substantial. But the good news is that there is the beginnings now of serious research into this area, so that's crucial. The obesity epidemic, I don't think any of us have got answers to how to modify behavior in a way that's going to have a real impact on that, most importantly in children. So I think they're great innovations, and we look forward, working with the Entrepreneurship Institute and you, to come up with solutions that we can then test in our local populations.